Captain Lee Daho stood on the bridge of the Harmony's edge, watching the stars streak past in hyperspace. His ship was one of the finest vessels in the Galactic Confederation fleet. It had been built by 5 different alien species working together. With humans, the result was something beautiful and deadly. "Captain, we are approaching the patrol zone," said Commander Park Minji from her station. She was his first officer and had served with him for 3 years. In that time, they had become close friends and trusted partners. The bridge crew was a perfect example of what the Confederation stood for. Besides the humans, there were Viridians made of living crystal who could process data faster than any computer. The Delphins looked like walking dolphins and could navigate through space using sound waves that no other species could hear. 2 hive minds worked at the sensor stations. They looked like large insects but shared thoughts with millions of their kind across the galaxy. At the weapons station sat Keth, a Drakmari warrior whose people valued honor above all else. His blue skin was covered in ritual scars that told the story of his battles. The luminals were harder to see because they were made of pure energy, but their presence could be felt as a warm glow near the engineering controls. "Take us out of hyperspace," Daho ordered. The ship shuddered slightly as it dropped back into normal space. Before them stretched the edge of known space, where the galaxy met the great darkness beyond. "Sir, I am picking up something strange," said Kim Junho from the science station. He was young for a chief science officer, but his mind was sharp. "There are energy readings coming from the barrier region. The galactic barrier was a wall of dangerous radiation that marked the edge of their galaxy. Nothing was supposed to be able to survive out there. For thousands of years, it had been empty space." "Show me," Daho said. The main screen lit up with sensor data. Yunho had found dozens of objects floating near the barrier. They were clearly artificial, but they were unlike anything in the Confederation database. "They appear to be probes of some kind," Junho reported, "but the design is completely unknown. The materials they are made from do not match anything we have seen before." Commander Park stepped closer to the screen. "How long have they been there?" "That is the strange part," Junho said. "According to the radiation decay, they have been floating dead in space for at least 50,000 years. But 5 minutes ago they all activated at the same time." A chill ran down Daho's spine. "What are they doing now?" "They are transmitting," said Vel, one of the hive minds. Her voice sounded like wind through crystal caves. "The signal is very strong and very focused. They are sending coordinates." "Coordinates to where?" "Deep space, far beyond the barrier. The signal is reaching into the dark areas between galaxies." Daho had been a starship captain for 15 years. He had fought pirates, explored new worlds, and made first contact with 2 minor species. But he had never felt fear like this before. Something about those ancient probes made his human instincts scream danger. "Are they responding to anything we did?" he asked. Junho checked his instruments again. "No, sir. They activated on their own. But I think our arrival might have triggered some kind of automatic response." The Drakmari warrior Keth stood up from his station. "Captain, my people have legends about objects like these. We call them herald stones. They are said to announce the return of the Devourers." Everyone on the bridge became very quiet. The Devourers were a myth, a story told to frighten children. According to the legends, they had once swept across the galaxy like a plague, consuming entire civilizations. But that was supposed to have happened so long ago that even the oldest records only mentioned them in passing. "The Devourers are just stories," Park said, but her voice was not as confident as her words. "My people do not tell stories about things that never existed," Keth replied. His hand moved to the weapon at his side. "The scars on our homeworld are real. The empty systems in our territory are real. Something destroyed those worlds, and it was not war or natural disaster. Daho made a decision that would change everything." "Junho, I want a full analysis of those probes. Record everything they are transmitting. Park, contact Confederation Central. We need to report this immediately." "Sir," interrupted the Delphin navigator Splash. "The probes are moving." On the screen, they watched as the ancient objects began to arrange themselves in a perfect formation. The energy reading spiked as they prepared to transmit something much stronger than before. "Captain, I recommend we withdraw to a safe distance," Park said. But before Deho could give the order, the probes released a pulse of energy that washed over their ship. For a moment, every system on the bridge flickered. The luminals grew brighter, the Viridian's crystal bodies rang like bells, and the hive mind suddenly went completely still. "What just happened?" Deho demanded. "They scanned us," Junho said, his face pale. "Not just our ship, but us. I think they recorded detailed information about every species on this bridge. The implications hit everyone at the same time. If the probes were really Herald Stones, if the Devourers were real and coming back, then they now knew exactly what the current galaxy looked like. They would know about humans, about the Confederation, about all their strengths and weaknesses. "Get us back to Confederation Central," Deho ordered, best speed. As the Harmony's Edge jumped back into hyperspace, none of them noticed that one of the Viridians on the bridge had begun to glow with a strange inner light. The probe's scan had done more than just gather information. For some of the crew, it had awakened something that had been sleeping for a very long time. 3 days later, they arrived at Confederation Central, a massive space station that served as the capital of their alliance. It was built around an artificial star and housed representatives from all 6 species. The station was a symbol of everything good about their civilization working together. Deho and his senior officers were called before the High Council immediately. The council chamber was designed so that each species could be comfortable. There were pools of water for the Delphins, energy fields for the Luminals, and communication networks for the hive minds. "Captain Lee," said High Counselor Thane, a Drakmari who had served on the council for 20 years. "Your report about these Herald Stones is very disturbing." "Sir, I believe they represent a serious threat to the Confederation," Deho replied. But the response was not what he expected. The Viridian representative, a being called Resonance, spoke in musical tones. "Humans have always been quick to see danger where none exists. Perhaps these are simply ancient navigation beacons," the Delphin counselor agreed. "The ocean of space holds many mysteries. Not all of them are threats." Even some of the hive minds seemed doubtful. The probability that a mythical enemy would return after 50,000 years is very small. Only the Drakmari and the Luminals seemed to take the threat seriously. But in the Confederation, all major decisions required agreement from at least 4 of the 6 species. Deho felt frustration growing in his chest. These were his friends, his allies, the people he had trusted with his life countless times. But they were not listening. "With respect, counselors," he said, "I think we should at least increase patrols in the outer systems. If I am wrong, we lose nothing. If I am right, we might save billions of lives." After hours of debate, the council agreed to a small increase in patrol activity, but they would not authorize the kind of massive preparation that Deho believed was necessary. As he left the council chamber, Park walked beside him. "They think we are being paranoid," she said. "Maybe we are," Deho replied. "But I would rather be paranoid and alive than trusting and dead." Neither of them knew that their fears were completely justified. Far beyond the galactic barrier, ancient ships that had been sleeping for millennia began to stir. The Herald Stones had done their job. The Devourers were coming home, and they were very, very hungry. 6 months had passed since the Herald Stones were discovered. Captain Lee Deho had almost begun to hope that the council was right. Maybe they were just ancient navigation beacons after all. Maybe his human instincts had been wrong. Then, the first Devourer ship appeared. Admiral Yoon Seojun was commanding a joint task force of 12 ships when the contact alarm sounded. The fleet was patrolling the outer rim, following the new patrol routes that had been established after Deho's discovery. "Admiral, we have an unknown vessel approaching from beyond the barrier," reported Lieutenant Commander Han Sua from the sensor station. "It is not responding to our communication attempts." Yoon studied the readings on his command screen. The ship was unlike anything in the database. It seemed to be alive, with surfaces that moved and shifted like skin. Biomechanical. Designs were not unknown among the galaxy species, but this was different. This looked hungry. All ships, battle formation, Yoon ordered. Raise shields and charge weapons. The 11 other ships in the task force moved into position. There were vessels from all 6 species of the Confederation. Humans provided the command ship and 2 destroyers. The Drakmari had sent their finest battlecruiser. Viridian crystal ships gleamed like jewels in space. Delphan vessels moved with liquid grace, while hive mind ships buzzed with coordinated activity. The luminal ship was barely visible, more energy than matter. The alien vessel stopped just outside weapon range. For long minutes, nothing happened. Then it began to change. "Admiral," Sua said, her voice tight with worry. "The ship is growing." She was right. The vessel was literally expanding, adding new sections to itself as they watched. Weapon pods sprouted from its hull like flowers blooming in fast motion. Armor plating shifted and thickened. "It is learning our formation," observed Captain Drek of the Drakmari battlecruiser. "It is adapting to face us." Before Yoon could respond, the enemy ship opened fire. Its weapons were unlike anything they had ever seen. Instead of energy beams or projectiles, it launched what looked like living creatures. These biomissiles struck the shields of the lead Viridian ship and began to eat through them. "All ships return fire," Yoon commanded. The battle was fierce but brief. The Confederation ships poured everything they had into the alien vessel. But every time they damaged it, the ship healed itself. Worse, it seemed to learn from each attack. After the first volley of human plasma cannons, it developed armor that absorbed plasma energy. When the Drakmari fired their particle beams, the ship grew reflective plating. "Sir, the enemy vessel is downloading our weapon signatures," reported the hive mind liaison. "It is analyzing our capabilities in real time." One by one, the Confederation ships found their weapons becoming useless. The alien vessel was adapting faster than they could change tactics. It was only when the luminal ship unleashed a pure energy attack that they managed to damage it seriously. The enemy ship retreated, but not before launching one final surprise. A small pod detached from its hull and flew toward the disabled Viridian vessel. "Intercept that pod," Yoon ordered, but it was too late. The biomechanical object struck the crystal ship and burrowed into its hull like a parasite. Sergeant Choi Minho was aboard the Drakmari battlecruiser when Admiral Yoon called for boarding parties. As a human marine, he had trained alongside Drakmari warriors for years. They respected each other's courage and skill. "We go in hard and fast," rumbled Korvac, the Drakmari squad leader. His people were natural warriors, standing 7 feet tall with blue skin and natural armor plating. The Crystal Singers cannot defend themselves if that thing is eating their ship from inside. The boarding pods launched from the battlecruiser and attached to the Viridian vessel. Minho and his mixed team of human marines and Drakmari warriors cut through the hull and entered the ship. What they found inside made them sick. The Viridian crew were all dead, but their bodies had been preserved in some kind of organic webbing. The alien pod had grown throughout the ship, spreading tendrils that connected to every system. At the center of this growth was a pulsing chamber that contained something horrible. "By the void," whispered Korvac. "What is this thing?" Minho approached the chamber carefully. Inside, he could see organic machinery processing the bodies of the dead Viridians. Their crystal structure was being broken down and analyzed. Their memories were being extracted and stored. "It is learning about them," Minho realized. "This thing is studying the Viridians to understand how to fight them better." But that was not the worst part. As they watched, the chamber began to produce new biomechanical components. These were copies of Viridian technology, but twisted and wrong. The alien ship was not just learning about its enemies. It was stealing their knowledge and using it to make itself stronger. "We need to get this information back to the Admiral," Minho said. "Everyone needs to know what we are really facing." They planted explosives and evacuated the Viridian ship before it could finish its analysis. But the damage was done. The enemy had learned about crystal technology, and it would be ready for that weakness next time. When they returned to the task force, Admiral Yoon immediately contacted Confederation Central. The evidence was clear and terrifying. These were not just unknown aliens. These were the Devourers from the ancient legends, and they were more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The response from the High Council was swift but divided. The Ice Drakmari wanted to mobilize every warship in their fleet. The Luminals agreed that the threat was serious, but the other species were not so sure. "One ship does not make an invasion," argued the Delphin counselor. "Perhaps this was just a scout that got lost." The Viridian representative, Resonance, had a different concern. "Our people who died in this attack, their knowledge has been stolen. This is a violation of everything we hold sacred." But it was the hive mind response that worried Yoon the most. Their representative seemed distracted during the emergency council session. Several times it failed to respond when asked direct questions. When it finally did speak, its words were strange. "The collective is processing new information," it said. "Some of our nodes have been experiencing unusual dreams." Admiral Yoon felt a chill run down his spine. Dreams were not something that hive minds experienced. They shared thoughts and memories, but individual dreams required individual consciousness. If the hive minds were dreaming, something was very wrong. Over the following weeks, more Devourer ships appeared throughout Confederation space. Each attack followed the same pattern. The biomechanical vessels would engage Confederation forces, learn from the battle, and retreat after capturing samples of technology or crew members. Lieutenant Commander Han Sua was assigned to analyze the pattern of attacks. What she discovered was deeply disturbing. The Devourers were not attacking randomly. They were systematically gathering information about each species in the Confederation. They hit a Delphin colony and spent most of their time studying the sonic navigation systems, she reported to Admiral Yoon. When they attacked the Luminal research station, they ignored the weapons and focused on the energy conversion technology. "What about the attacks on human settlements?" "Those are different," Sua said grimly. "When they attack us, they seem most interested in our brains. They are studying how humans think and make decisions." The implications were terrifying. The Devourers were not just learning about Confederation technology. They were learning about the psychology and biology of each species. They were preparing for a much larger conflict. But the most disturbing discovery came from Dr. Shin Nayung at the Confederation's main research facility. She had been studying the biomechanical samples recovered from Devourer attacks. Her analysis revealed something that changed everything. "Admiral," she said during an encrypted communication, "I have found traces of Confederation technology in these Devourer samples. Not copies or stolen designs, but actual components from our own ships. How is that possible?" "I think some of our allies have been in contact with the Devourers for much longer than we realized. These biomechanical systems contain Viridian crystal matrices that are at least 50 years old. The organic components include Delphin sonic resonators from the same time period. The betrayal cut deep. While humans had been warning about the Devourer threat, some of their closest allies had been secretly working with the enemy. The Golden Alliance that had brought peace to the galaxy was built on lies." Admiral Yoon called an emergency meeting of human military commanders. The time for trusting in the Confederation was over. Humanity needed to prepare for the possibility that they would have to face the Devourers alone. "How long do we have?" asked General Park Taemin. "Based on the pattern of attacks, I estimate 6 months before they launch a full-scale invasion," Yoon replied. "Maybe less." "Then we had better start preparing our people for war," Park said grimly. "A war where we cannot trust anyone but ourselves." As the meeting ended, news arrived that made their fears reality. The Delphin fleet had withdrawn from joint operations, claiming they needed to defend their home systems. The Viridians had recalled their ships for maintenance and upgrades. Even the hive minds were pulling back, saying their collective needed time to process recent developments. Only the Drakmari remained fully committed to. The Battle of Nexus Prime would be remembered as the day the Confederation died. Colonel Bae Yunho commanded the human ground forces when the Devourers launched their largest attack yet. Nexus Prime was a strategic world that housed the main communication hub for 3 sectors. If it fell, entire regions of space would be cut off from each other. The defense fleet was the largest joint force ever assembled. 200 ships from all 6 species took positions around the planet. Admiral Yoon Seojin commanded from his Z-2 flagship, hoping that this massive show of unity would prove the Confederation could still work together. For 3 hours, the battle went well. The Devourer fleet was larger than before, but the combined firepower of the defenders seemed to be holding them back. Then the betrayal began. "Admiral, the Drakmari battle group is pulling back," reported Lieutenant Commander Han Sua from the sensor station. Yoon could not believe what he was seeing. The proud Drakmari warriors, humanity's closest military allies, were abandoning the battle. Their commander, Admiral Thex, appeared on the communication screen. "We must preserve our ships for the defense of Drakmari space," Thex said, his blue face showing no emotion. "Our duty is to our own people first. Your duty is to the Confederation," Yoon shot back. "If Nexus Prime falls, your worlds will be next." "Perhaps. But if we lose our fleet here, our worlds will definitely fall." The Drakmari ships jumped to hyperspace, leaving a massive gap in the defensive line. The Devourers immediately exploited, the opening pouring through with their biomechanical vessels. Worse was yet to come. Within minutes, the Delphin squadrons also began to withdraw. Then the Viridian crystal ships stopped firing altogether, claiming their weapon systems had mysteriously malfunctioned. On the planet's surface, Colonel Bay watched the sky fill with Devourer landing craft. His mixed regiment of human marines and alien allies was supposed to defend the communication complex. But as the enemy ships approached, his alien troops began to receive orders from their home governments. "Sir," said his Drakmari second-in-command, "I have been ordered to extract my warriors immediately." "We need every fighter we have," Bay replied. "The civilians are depending on us." "I am sorry, human friend, but my orders are clear." One by one, the non-human troops were pulled out. The Viridian Crystal Singers claimed they had detected dangerous radiation that only affected their species. The Delphins said their sonic weapons would interfere with the evacuation frequencies. Even the hive mind soldiers suddenly lost contact with their collective and had to be withdrawn for mental health evaluation. Colonel Bay found himself commanding a force that was now 90% human. They were outnumbered 50-1, but they did not retreat. They could not retreat. 20 million civilians were trapped on Nexus Prime, and someone had to buy time for the evacuation ships. The battle on the ground was brutal. The Devourer creatures were unlike anything in the military training manuals. They looked like a cross between machines and insects, with metal claws and biomechanical armor. They moved with purpose and intelligence, adapting their tactics as the fight progressed. But they had not fought humans who had nothing left to lose. Sergeant Ryu Dongwook led a squad of Marines in a desperate charge against a Devourer processing center. These facilities were where the enemy converted captured civilians into raw materials for their war machine. The sight of human families being fed into organic machinery filled the Marines with a rage that surprised even themselves. "No prisoners," Ryu shouted as his squad stormed the facility. "No mercy for things that eat children." The Marines fought with a ferocity that shocked the Devourers. These biomechanical creatures had conquered hundreds of worlds, but they had never faced defenders who would rather die than give up a single civilian. Every building became a fortress. Every street became a killing ground. In orbit, Admiral Yoon was fighting his own desperate battle. With most of his alien allies gone, his remaining human ships were badly outnumbered. But the evacuation was still in progress. Refugee ships filled with civilians were trying to reach the jump points. "Sir, Devourer boarding pods are targeting the evacuation transports," reported Sua. Yoon made a decision that would haunt him forever. "All ships, intercept those pods. Protect the civilian vessels at all costs." The human warships threw themselves between the Devourers and the refugee ships. Captain Lim Seung-wan piloted his destroyer directly into the path of a massive Devourer biocruiser, using his ship as a shield for a transport full of children. "This is Lim to all ships," he broadcast on the open channel. "We hold the line. Here, we hold it for them." His destroyer exploded in a ball of plasma, but the refugee ship escaped. The evacuation took 6 hours. When it was over, 17 human warships had been destroyed, and Colonel Bay's ground forces had been reduced to less than 1,000 survivors. But they had saved 20 million lives. The cost of this victory became clear when Admiral Yoon tried to contact Confederation Central. The massive space station that served as the capital of their alliance was dark and empty. Commander Park Minji, now captain of her own vessel, was part of the small fleet that investigated. What they found inside the station was worse than a battle. It was a crime scene. The station had not been attacked. It had been abandoned. The alien representatives had packed up their equipment and left in the middle of the night, but they had not gone quietly. Classified human military files had been copied. Strategic databases had been downloaded. Worst of all, the locations of every human colony and military base had been transmitted to unknown recipients. Dr. Shin Nayoung, who had been working at the main research facility, discovered evidence of the final betrayal. Hidden in her computer system were fragments of communications between alien officials and Devourer representatives. The negotiations had been going on for years. The terms were always the same: provide information about human capabilities and locations, and your species would be absorbed rather than consumed when the Devourers returned. Absorption meant slavery and the loss of individual identity, but it was better than the complete destruction that awaited those who resisted. They sold us out, Park said as she read the recovered files. All of them, even the Drakmari. Not all of them, as it turned out. Some individuals from each species had refused to go along with their government's decisions. A few Drakmari warriors chose exile rather than betray their human comrades. Several Viridian crystal singers destroyed their own memory cores rather than let them be used against humanity. Small groups of Delphins and hive-mind individuals went into hiding, knowing they would be hunted by their own kind. But these brave individuals were too few to matter in the larger war that was coming. President Na Dong-hyun addressed the emergency session of the Terran Assembly from the underground bunkers beneath Geneva. The surface cities of Earth were already being evacuated as Devourer scout fleets approached the Sol system. "We face extinction," he said simply. "Our allies have chosen to save themselves by sacrificing us. We cannot blame them for this choice, because it is the logical one. But we will not make the same choice they did." The president looked directly into the camera, knowing his words would be heard on every human world and ship. "We will not abandon any human settlement. We will not trade lives for time. If we stand alone, then we stand alone together. Every human world that asks for our help will receive it. Every human ship that fights the enemy will have our support. This is who we are. This is who we choose to be." The speech was broadcast throughout human space. On remote colonies and distant outposts, people heard their president's promise and knew it was true. No matter how bad things got, humanity would not abandon its own. But the speech was also intercepted by Devourer listening posts. The enemy now knew something that would prove very important in the battles to come. Humans would not make deals. They would not abandon their weak to save their strong. They would fight to the bitter end for every single life. This knowledge would make the Devourers more cautious, but it would also make them more determined. A species that refused to surrender was a species that had to be completely destroyed. In the deep archives beneath the Terran Defense Ministry, Dr. Shin Nayoung made a discovery that changed everything. She was analyzing captured Devourer technology when she found something impossible. The biomechanical components contained traces of absorbed civilizations going back millions of years. The Devourers had not just conquered the galaxy once before. They had done it dozens of times. Every 50,000 years they would emerge from the dark space between galaxies, consume every advanced civilization they could find, and then retreat to digest their gains. The current galactic civilization was just the latest in a very long cycle. But there was something different this time. In all their previous harvests, the Devourers had never encountered a species like humans. They had faced brave defenders before, clever strategists, advanced technologies, but they had never faced a species that simply refused to accept the logic of survival at any cost. This is why the other species betrayed us, Nayoung realized. Somewhere in their racial memories they remember the last harvest. They know that resistance is futile. They know that the only logical choice is to submit and hope for mercy, but humans had no. Fleet Admiral Song Jae-hyun stood in the war room deep beneath Earth's surface, surrounded by holographic displays showing the current state of human space. Red markers indicated worlds under attack. Yellow showed colonies that were evacuating. Green marked the few systems that were still secure. There was far too much red on the map. Admiral, the Senate has approved Protocol Omega, reported General Park Taemin, head of Terran Special Operations. All restrictions have been lifted. Song nodded grimly. Protocol Omega was humanity's deepest secret, hidden even from their former allies in the Confederation. For 300 years, humans had played the role of peaceful explorers and cooperative partners. But that had only been one face of their species. Activate all black sites, Song ordered. Wake up the sleeper projects. It is time to show the galaxy what humans really are when everything we care about is threatened. Across human space, hidden facilities began to power up. Research stations that officially did not exist started producing weapons that had been banned by Confederation law. Military units that had been training in secret for decades prepared to deploy technologies that their alien allies had never suspected. Captain Lim Seung-wan had survived the destruction of his ship at Nexus Prime, rescued by a passing medical transport. Now he stood on the bridge of the TDF Retribution, one of the new warships that had been built in secret shipyards beyond the edge of mapped space. The Retribution looked like a human destroyer from the outside, but its interior was completely different. Every system was designed for one purpose: to hunt and kill devourer bioships. The crew wore neural interface headsets that linked their minds directly to the ship's weapons and sensors. Their reaction times were measured in milliseconds rather than seconds. "Captain, we have contact with a devourer patrol," reported his tactical officer. 3 biocruisers heading for the Kepler colony. "Light them up," Seung-wan ordered. The attack was over in less than 30 seconds. The human ship moved with impossible precision, its weapons striking weak points that the devourers did not know they had. When the biocruisers tried to adapt and regenerate, they found that the human weapons changed too, staying one step ahead of their defensive evolution. "Sir, we are receiving a transmission from the lead devourer ship," the communications officer reported, sounding shocked. "Put it through." The voice that came through the speakers was harsh and metallic, but it spoke perfect human language. "What are you? We have consumed 1,000 species, but none have fought like this. What manner of creatures are you?" Seung-wan smiled coldly. "We are humans, and you just made the mistake of threatening our families." Similar battles were taking place throughout the war zone. Major Kang Ji-young led the first boarding action against a devourer command vessel, her Marines wearing power armor that interfaced directly with their nervous systems. They moved through the biomechanical corridors like deadly ghosts, adapting to enemy defenses faster than the ship could respond. The devourers had conquered hundreds of worlds by learning from their enemies and adapting, but they had never faced enemies who learned and adapted faster than they did. In the research labs on Luna, Dr. Shin Na-young worked with a team of scientists who had been secretly studying devourer technology for decades. The samples that had been recovered from recent battles were not their first look at the enemy. Humans had been finding traces of devourer activity for centuries, hidden in archaeological sites and ancient ruins. "Every advancement we have made has been designed with this day in mind," she explained to Director Oh Chang-min, head of the Secret Research Division. "Our quantum computers can process devourer biodata. Our nanotechnology can repair itself faster than their weapons can damage it. Our neural interfaces allow our pilots to think at machine speeds." "How long have we known?" Changmin asked. "The first evidence was found in 2156 on Tau Ceti 4. Ancient ruins showed clear signs of devourer harvesting technology. We have been preparing for this war for over 200 years. But the most important discovery was yet to come." Dr. Na-young's team had not just been studying how to fight the devourers. They had been working on something that everyone thought was impossible: how to reverse the absorption process. "We can free them," she announced during an emergency briefing. "Every world the devourers have consumed Every species they have absorbed, all of it can be undone. The implications were staggering. The Devourers did not just destroy civilizations, they stored them, keeping the consciousness and knowledge of every absorbed being as a resource for their war machine. If humans could reverse this process, they could literally bring the dead back to life. How many? Asked Admiral Song. Based on our analysis of their bioships, we estimate that each major vessel contains the stored consciousness of approximately 50,000 individuals. A Devourer fleet carries the souls of entire civilizations. This changed everything. The war was no longer just about survival, it was about liberation. Admiral Lee Kyung-ho, Song's deputy commander, was given charge of the new offensive strategy. Operation Remembrance would be the largest military action in human history. Instead of just defending their worlds, humanity would attack deep into Devourer space, targeting their command ships and processing centers. We go in hard and we go in fast, Lee explained to his fleet commanders. Every ship we destroy frees thousands of trapped souls. Every facility we capture gives us access to stolen knowledge that belongs to species who died fighting these monsters. The first major offensive was launched against the Devourer stronghold in the Vega system. Captain Hwang So-young commanded the science vessel Lazarus, equipped with the experimental consciousness restoration equipment. Her job was to liberate a dead Viridian world that had been consumed during the early phase of the war. The battle to take the system was fierce, but it was unlike any previous engagement. The human ships fought with a precision and coordination that seemed impossible. Every pilot, every gunner, every tactical officer was linked to a central battle network that allowed them to move like a single organism. The Devourers had never faced an enemy that could out-adapt them. Their bioships tried to evolve new defenses, but the human weapons evolved faster. When they attempted to use their stored knowledge to predict human tactics, they found that humanity had been deliberately feeding them false information for months. When the system was secure, Captain Hwang began the restoration process. The dead Viridian world was not truly dead. Its ecosystem had been converted into biomechanical processing centers, but the original planetary consciousness was still there, trapped in Devourer storage matrices. Beginning restoration protocol, Hwang reported to Fleet Command. Estimated time to full planetary revival, 72 hours. What happened next was a miracle that was witnessed throughout the galaxy. The dead world began to bloom again. Crystalline forests grew from the biomechanical soil. Seas of liquid music returned to their ancient shores, and in specially prepared biotanks, new Viridian bodies began to grow, ready to house the consciousness of those who had been thought lost forever. The first liberated Viridian was called Harmony, and her first words were addressed to the human captain who had freed her. "Why did you save us? We abandoned you. We betrayed you. Why do you risk your lives for those who chose cowardice over loyalty?" Hwang's answer was broadcast throughout the galaxy, heard by every species that had withdrawn from the fight. "Because you were our friends once. Because everyone deserves a second chance. Because it is the right thing to do." News of the liberation spread quickly. The former allies who had abandoned humanity watched in amazement as dead worlds came back to life. Species that had been extinct for millennia were walking among the living again. The impossible had become reality, but the most shocking response came from the Drakmari. Admiral Thex, who had abandoned the battle at Nexus Prime, appeared on every communication channel with a message that stunned everyone. "We have dishonored ourselves," he said, his proud face showing deep shame. "We chose survival over duty, fear over courage. We beg the humans to allow us to fight beside them once more, not as equals, but as servants seeking to restore our honor." General Park Taman's response was cold, but not cruel. "You may fight alongside us, but you will never again fight as our equals. Trust once broken cannot be fully repaired. You will follow our orders without question, and you will prove your worth through your actions, not your words." Other species began to return as well, but the relationship had changed forever. Humanity was no longer the junior partner in a galactic alliance. They had become the guardians of civilization itself, and everyone else would have to earn their place in this new order. The Devourers, faced with systematic losses for the first time in their existence, began to fragment. Some factions sent envoys to negotiate with humanity, offering to return consumed worlds in exchange for being allowed to retreat to dark space. The human response was simple and direct. Unconditional surrender. Return everything you have stolen. Submit to judgment for your crimes. There will be no deals, no negotiations, no mercy for those who eat children. But the most dangerous faction of Devourers chose a different path. If they could not win through conventional warfare, they would activate their ultimate weapon. The Great Convergence ritual sites were scattered across the galaxy, hidden in ancient structures that had been built millions of years ago. Each site was protected by massive Devourer fleets and surrounded by space that twisted reality itself. Getting close enough to destroy them seemed impossible. Admiral Song Jae-hyun studied the tactical display in the war room, watching as red dots marked each known ritual site. There were 47 of them, and humanity had maybe 12 hours before the convergence began. "We cannot hit all the sites simultaneously," reported General Park Taemin. "We do not have enough ships or troops for a coordinated strike." Then, "We hit the primary site," Song decided. According to Dr. Shin's analysis, the ritual requires a central control node to synchronize all the others. Destroy that, and the entire system collapses. The primary site was located in the Void Nebula, a region of space that had been considered impossible to navigate. The nebula was filled with gravitational anomalies, quantum storms, and other hazards that had destroyed every ship that had tried to enter it. But now they knew why. The Devourers had been using it as their main base for millions of years. Captain Hwang So-young's science vessel Lazarus had been modified for the mission. Her ship now carried experimental shielding that could protect it from the nebula's effects, along with the most advanced consciousness restoration equipment ever built. If they succeeded in stopping the convergence, there would be thousands of absorbed beings to liberate from the Devourer command centers. "So-young, your job is to get the liberation equipment to the target," Admiral Song explained during the final briefing. "The rest of us will clear the way." The assault fleet was the largest force humanity had ever assembled. Every available ship had been called back from patrol duties and defensive positions. Even the secret vessels that had been kept in reserve were brought out of hiding. But they were not going alone. The Drakmari had kept their word, sending every ship they could spare under human command. Admiral Thex himself served as a subordinate to human officers, his proud warrior culture humbled. By their earlier betrayal, small groups of other species had joined as well. Viridian crystal singers who had been liberated from Devourer processing centers wanted revenge for their destroyed worlds. Delphan naval officers who had refused their government's surrender orders brought their ships out of hiding. Even a few hive mind vessels appeared, crewed by individuals who had broken away from their collective to fight alongside humanity. "This is not about the old alliances," Song announced to the mixed fleet. "This is about the future of all life in this galaxy. Today we fight as one people with one purpose." The journey into the Void Nebula was like traveling through a nightmare. Space itself seemed to be alive and hostile. Gravitational fields shifted without warning, trying to crush ships between invisible forces. Quantum storms erupted from nowhere, threatening to scatter vessels across multiple dimensions. Captain Lim Sung-hwan, commanding the destroyer Retribution, watched his sensors go crazy as they pushed deeper into the nebula. "I have never seen readings like this," he reported. "It is as if the laws of physics are different here." "That is because they are," replied Dr. Shin Na-young from her position on the science vessel. "The Devourers have been modifying this region of space for eons. They have turned it into something that exists partially in our dimension and partially in their home realm." The Devourer home realm was a place of pure hunger and endless consumption. It was where the ancient race had originated, and where they retreated between their galactic harvests. No living being had ever seen it and returned to tell the tale. As the fleet pushed deeper into the nebula, they began to encounter Devourer defenses. These were not the biomechanical ships they had fought before. These were creatures of living, void, beings that existed in the spaces between atoms. They attacked not with weapons but by trying to unmake the very existence of the human ships. Maintain formation, Admiral Song ordered as reality twisted around them. Do not let them separate us. The battle was fought on multiple levels of existence. Human weapons had to be constantly modified to affect enemies that kept shifting between dimensions. Pilots found themselves fighting creatures that attacked their memories as well as their ships. Major Kang Ji-young led a boarding party against what appeared to be a Devourer command vessel, only to discover that it was actually a living piece of their home dimension that had been forced into normal space. Her Marines had to fight their way through corridors that tried to digest them, past enemies that attacked their sense of self. Stay focused on who you are, she shouted to her troops. Remember your names, remember your homes, remember why we are here. The closer they got to the primary ritual site, the more reality began to break down. Some ships found themselves fighting battles that had happened years ago. Others encountered crew members who had died in previous engagements now serving the enemy. Colonel John Min-soo, commanding the Special Operations Force that would assault the ritual site itself, watched his soldiers struggle against enemies that attacked their minds as well as their bodies. The Devourer defenders were trying to break their will to fight by showing them visions of their worst fears. They are trying to make us afraid, he told his troops. But we are humans. We do not surrender to fear. The final approach to the ritual site required passage through what the Devourers called the threshold. This was a barrier between dimensions that only the most advanced beings could cross. Humans were not supposed to be advanced enough to survive the passage. They were wrong. The human ships passed through the threshold by doing something that the Devourers had never expected. Instead of trying to protect themselves from the dimensional forces, they embraced them. Human consciousness was flexible enough to exist in multiple realities simultaneously without losing coherence. We are through, reported Captain Huang as her science vessel emerged on the other side. I can see the primary ritual site. What she saw defied description. The site was a structure the size of a small planet, built from materials that existed in several dimensions at once. At its center was a massive chamber where thousands of Devourer leaders were conducting the final phase of the convergence ritual. But that was not the most shocking discovery. The ritual chamber was surrounded by storage tanks containing the consciousness of every being the Devourers had ever consumed. Billions upon billions of souls, all connected to the ritual and providing it with power. The convergence is not just a weapon, Dr. Shin realized. It is powered by the suffering of every species they have ever destroyed. They are using the pain of their victims to fuel their own transcendence. The assault on the ritual site was the most desperate battle in human history. Colonel John's troops had to fight their way through defenses that included not just Devourer warriors, but the corrupted souls of absorbed beings who had been turned into weapons against the living. Commander Yi Seung-min led the technical team that would disable the ritual machinery. His consciousness had been enhanced with quantum interfaces that allowed him to think at near-light speed, but even he was struggling against systems that operated according to the logic of pure hunger. The ritual is almost complete, he reported. I need more time to understand how to stop it. Time we do not have, replied Colonel Jean as his troops fought off another wave of dimensional horrors. That was when Dr. An Yujin made the discovery that changed everything. The convergence ritual was indeed powered by the suffering of absorbed beings, but it had a fatal flaw. It required the willing participation of at least one consciousness from each absorbed species. They need volunteers, she explained over the communication network. The ritual cannot work if every absorbed being refuses to participate. But these souls have been tortured for millennia. Yi protested. How can we ask them to resist when they have suffered so much? The answer came from an unexpected source. Among the stored consciousness in the ritual chamber were beings who had been absorbed during the Devourer's previous harvests. Some of them had been waiting for 50,000 years, maintaining their sanity and their will to resist through sheer determination. These ancient souls spoke to the newly absorbed beings, sharing their strength and their hope. They told them about the humans who had come to free everyone, about the species who had learned to bring the dead back to life. One by one, The absorbed consciousness began to withdraw their participation from the ritual. The Devourer leaders tried to force compliance, but they discovered something they had never encountered before. When beings were given hope, they became impossible to break. The convergence ritual began to collapse, its power sources failing. As millions of souls chose defiance over despair, the massive structure started to tear itself apart as dimensional forces ran out of control. "All ships, prepare for immediate evacuation," Admiral Song ordered. "The entire site is becoming unstable." But there was a problem. The dimensional collapse would trap everyone inside the nebula, unless someone stayed behind to guide the evacuation ships through the failing barriers between realities. Sergeant Ryu Dongwook volunteered without hesitation. His enhanced physiology could survive in the unstable dimensional environment long enough to maintain the navigation. The title of their story was proven true in the final days of the war. When the last and most desperate mission was announced, humanity's best stepped forward without hesitation, without debate, and without asking for volunteers. Colonel Jian. Minsu stood before the assembled strike team in the briefing room of the command ship. These were the survivors of the assault on the primary ritual site, soldiers and scientists who had already given more than anyone should be asked to give. Now they were being asked to give even more. "The destruction of the convergence ritual damaged the barriers between dimensions," he explained. "Devourer forces are now trapped in our reality, but that is not the end of our problems. The dimensional damage is spreading. If it reaches inhabited systems, entire worlds could be pulled into the void between realities." The solution was as dangerous as the problem. Someone would have to enter the damaged regions of space and manually repair the dimensional barriers from the inside. It was a one-way mission that would likely kill whoever attempted it. "I need volunteers," John said, then stopped himself. "No, that is wrong. I need people who understand what this mission means and choose to do it anyway." Every member of the strike team raised their hand. Commander Yi Sung-min was the first to speak. "Sir, my consciousness has been enhanced with quantum interfaces. I can survive longer in unstable dimensional space than anyone else." Dr. An Yujin nodded in agreement. "The quantum mechanics of dimensional repair are incredibly complex. You will need someone who understands the theoretical foundations." Sergeant Ryu Dongwook, who had already volunteered to sacrifice himself once, stepped forward again. "And you will need someone who can fight off whatever is waiting for us in there." The mission would take them into the heart of the dimensional storm that surrounded the destroyed ritual site. There, they would have to rebuild the barriers that kept different realities separate. The work required not just technical skill, but the ability to think and act while existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "The good news is that we will not be going alone," Colonel John announced. "The consciousness we freed from the Devourer storage tanks have offered to help. Some of them have been studying dimensional mechanics for thousands of years. The ancient souls who joined the mission were beings of incredible wisdom and power. They had maintained their sanity through eons of imprisonment by focusing on knowledge and hope. Now they would use everything they had learned to help repair the damage the Devourers had caused." The journey to the dimensional storm zone took 3 days. As they approached the damaged region of space, reality began to behave strangely. The ship's instruments showed readings that made no sense. Time moved at different speeds in different parts of the vessel. Gravity pointed in directions that did not exist. "We are entering the transition zone," Dr. An reported. "From here on, we will be partially in our dimension and partially in others." The first sign that they were not alone came when the ship's sensors detected movement in areas where nothing should be able to exist. The dimensional damage had created spaces between realities, and things lived there that had never been part of any normal universe. "Contact bearing 0 Mark 7, reported the sensor officer. "It is big, sir. Bigger than anything in our databases." On the main screen appeared something that defied description. It was part creature, part geometric shape, part mathematical equation made visible. It moved through dimensions the way fish moved through water, and it was heading directly for their ship. "It is a void shepherd," said one of the ancient souls through the communication system. They are the guardians of the spaces between realities. They are not evil, but they do not understand the concept of individual existence. To them, we are an infection that must be removed. Commander Yi tried to establish communication with the entity, but it responded by attempting to dissolve their ship into component equations. The vessel held together only because Dr. An had installed reality anchors throughout the hull. We cannot fight it conventionally, Colonel John realized. Our weapons exist in only 3 dimensions. That thing exists in at least 7. The solution came from Sergeant Ryu, who had always been better at practical problems than theoretical ones. Then we do not fight it. We convince it that we belong here. Using techniques learned from the ancient souls, the human crew temporarily expanded their consciousness into multiple dimensions. Instead of appearing as foreign invaders, they presented themselves as part of the natural order of the space between realities. The Void Shepherd examined them carefully, then moved aside. They had passed the first test. The dimensional repair work was the most difficult task any human had ever attempted. It required rebuilding the fundamental structure of space-time itself using tools that existed only in theory. Commander Yi's enhanced consciousness allowed him to perceive the damage directly, while Dr. An provided the mathematical framework for the repairs. But the real work was done by the ancient souls. They had been studying these problems for millennia, and they guided the human team through repairs that would have been impossible otherwise. Slowly, carefully, the barriers between dimensions were rebuilt. The process took 18 hours. During that time, the repair team existed in a state that was part human, part energy, part pure thought. They had to maintain their sense of identity, while their consciousness was spread across multiple realities. Final barrier in place, Dr. An reported, her voice sounding strange after hours of existing in expanded dimensions. Dimensional stability is returning to normal parameters. But their work was not finished. The repair process had attracted the attention of other entities from the spaces between realities. Some were curious about these strange beings who could exist in multiple dimensions without losing coherence. Others saw the humans as a threat to the natural order. "We have company," Sergeant Ryu announced as his sensors detected dozens of new contacts approaching their position. What followed was not a battle in any conventional sense. It was a negotiation conducted across multiple levels of reality, with concepts being exchanged instead of words. The ancient souls served as translators, helping the humans communicate with beings that thought in mathematical patterns rather than language. In the end, the entities agreed to leave the repaired dimensional barriers alone. In exchange, humanity promised to establish a monitoring station to ensure that the damage never spread to inhabited systems again. It would be staffed by volunteers who would spend their lives watching over the spaces between realities. The mission succeeded, but the cost was enormous. Several team members were lost in dimensions that no longer existed after the repairs were completed. Others were transformed into something beyond human understanding, becoming bridge entities that could exist in multiple realities simultaneously. Colonel Jean made it back, but he brought with him the memories of beings who had died. Millions of years ago, Commander Yi survived, but his consciousness now spanned 7 dimensions, making normal communication difficult. Dr. An returned with an understanding of physics that would advance human science by centuries. When they returned to normal space, they found a galaxy transformed. The defeat of the Devourers and the liberation of absorbed civilizations had created a new galactic order. Hundreds of ancient species now shared the stars with the younger races, bringing wisdom accumulated over eons, but the most dramatic change was in how other species viewed humanity. The former allies who had abandoned them during the crisis now stood ready to offer apologies, reparations, and renewed partnerships. Admiral Song Jae-hyun addressed the gathered representatives from the bridge of humanity's flagship. The aliens, who had once been equals, now waited respectfully for her words, understanding that the balance of power had shifted permanently. "We did not fight for glory," she said simply. "We did not fight for dominance. We did not fight for revenge. We fought because it was necessary. The galaxy is free, and that is enough." The Drakmari delegation, led by the humbled Admiral Thex, stepped forward first. "We offer our fleets, our worlds, our lives in service to humanity. We have no honor left, but we hope to earn some through faithful service." Song's response surprised everyone. "We do not want servants. We want partners. But partnerships must be built on trust, and trust must be earned through actions, not words." Other species made similar offers, each seeking to rebuild their relationship with humanity. But the humans made it clear that the old confederation was dead. What would replace it would be different, built on the understanding that some species were willing to sacrifice themselves for others, while others would always choose survival over duty. The new galactic government was called the Vigil, and its purpose was simple: to watch for threats that could endanger all life in the galaxy, and to respond without hesitation when those threats appeared. Humanity did not rule this new order. Instead, they became its guardians, taking responsibility for the safety of all species, whether those species wanted their protection or not. Human fleets patrolled the dark spaces between galaxies, watching for signs of new devourer activity or other existential threats. The restored civilizations were free to govern themselves as they chose, but they all understood that humanity was watching. If they chose cooperation and growth, they would be left alone.